Welcome to Metabolic Matters podcast, where we embark on conversations with thought leaders, disruptors, change agents, and passionate souls. Together, we'll delve into what truly matters to them. And you'll learn how to metabolize this newfound wisdom so you can transform your own metabolic health. Now let's meet today's guest. Wow. I am so honored to have such a superstar among us. I mean, when I think about your accolades, it's a little bit intimidating, honestly, Dr. Davis, to have you here with little old me on this conversation. But but before we dive into that, I just want our listeners to have a sense of my very first experience of you that has now developed over 20, or excuse me, not 20, 11 or 12 years we're coming on. So the very first time I met you, which I was telling you before we started recording, you would not have known because there were 2,500 people vying for your attention at the same time, which was at a huge integrative healthcare symposium in New York City in 2012. And you were discussing your book, Disconnect. And I had just read it probably months before that event. So I was already feeling a little giddy and starstruck. And you just gave a stellar presentation. If I recall, I think you even got a standing ovation because of the power of your work over decades that even led to that book. And so that was my first moment. And sort of, like I said, started fangirling very hard at that time. And then later, I can't remember if it was 2018 or 2019 that I had the absolute distinct pleasure of sharing a table with you at a fundraising event where it was like we'd always known each other. Like suddenly I don't have to vie through 2,500 people for your attention. We have this beautiful, intimate table and experience and conversations that have frankly continued on since then. And then I've had the amazing privilege of joining one of the most eye-opening and life-changing conferences that you co-facilitated, the EMF conference in, I believe that was 2018, in September 2018, which was mind-boggling, a bit overwhelming, and we'll touch on that today as well. And then this other amazing connection that we have is a co-publication on a mistletoe and bladder cancer case that I hope we get to discuss a little bit later as well. So our lives keep coming together in a variety of ways, and it's an absolute honor and joy to know you as the public figure that you are, but also to know you as this precious human being that you are, that I feel that you are very much a kindred soul. So welcome, welcome, welcome.
And let me reciprocate that, because I think that you are astonishing, and your mastery of the basic science as well as the whole gestalt that is needed to understand what medicine needs to do now is quite extraordinary and truly exceptional. So the honor is mine, and I'm really a very big fan as well as what you will be doing moving ahead. I have no doubt that we're going to see great things come out of the work that you're developing, and I'm really thrilled to know you as well. It's a privilege.
I love it. Well, the other thing here that I alluded to when we started this conversation is that honestly, your biography, your CV is no joke. I mean, the list, I could spend an entire episode of this conversation just going through your accolades. It's unbelievable. So we're going to link that because I want people to know your history. But when I think about this, an epidemiologist and a writer, you're known for your work in environmental issues, in electromagnetic field issues. We're going to talk a little bit later about where your work is taking you next. But you're an educator, you're a researcher, you're a policy maker, you're an advocate, you're a public speaker. The list goes on and on, of just the things I've learned about you over these years. But what I'd like you to know from you, and what I'd like for you to share with all of us, is out of all of the things that you've done over this incredible career, what one thing are you most proud of?
I think it's that when I was a young scientist, I worked at the National Academy of Sciences, and you may not remember when smoking was legal on airplanes.
I do.
So if you were on a plane where people smoked, everybody would stink when you got off a long flight. And I organized the first study of the National Academy of Sciences on the question of whether or not smoking on airplanes should continue. And ironically, we put together a committee. I will share with you that the committee had 7 women and 3 men. And when I put the committee roster together, and this was 1983, my boss said, "Aren't there a lot of women on this committee?" And I said, "Well, I thought there were a lot of men on most of the others." Right?
Already decades ahead of your time.
So it took the committee about a year and a half to write a report and another year and a half to get it out because there was so much pressure from the tobacco industry not to release it. But basically, the report said smoking could not be safe for non-smokers on airplanes. And by the way, it gummed up the equipment. And the gumming up of the equipment cost the industry money. And for
Wow.
that reason, that I think drove the decision not to allow smoking, more so than the health issues, frankly, at the time.
Wow.
So I think that's that one. I think also my work on lead poisoning for CDC, it's unbelievable if I tell you that in 1978, we debated whether to lower the action level from 40 micrograms to 30 micrograms
Oh
for
my
children.
word.
And now, of course, as you know, it's 5 or less.
I was just going to say it's under 5.
It's,
Oh,
and so that was quite an interesting experience because, it was the science, but it was also all of frankly, the economic pressures that often go against the science. So I think that those 2 things, getting smoking, not only
yeah,
did we get it off airplanes, but as you know, it's now not in public places all over the world.
exactly.
And it started with that study. And at the time, the tobacco industry was incredibly powerful. They sponsored research at the National Cancer Institute to develop a safe cigarette. I talked about that in my book, The Secret History of the War on Cancer. It was an
Yes.
amazing thing. So I think that's, if you ask me, the thing that I was involved in. And of course, like everything important, it wasn't that I did it. It was that the people I worked with, we came together to make this happen. And I often say that success has many parents and failure is an orphan, right? So that was I think that was a very important effort.
One of the things that's striking me right now and giving me goosebumps and feeling actually a little bit emotional around is, I mean, a lot of people know what I'm attempting to do in the world. And you alluded to that of, I know that great things are coming. And we are literally changing the cancer conversation. And we hope to change healthcare in general, cancer care in particular. And everyone tells me I'm taking on a Goliath and that this is impossible and it will never happen to take on the big corporations, the big things. And literally, I'm sitting across from a legend who has faced those exact same criticism and naysayers. And so I would love in this moment for myself or anybody else who's facing these types of seemingly impossible obstacles, what would your advice be? What would your words of wisdom be?
Remember, you can always stand on the truth.
Mm.
And that's why you have to stick with what you know to be true. And Margaret Mead said it years ago, never doubt that a small group of concerned people can change the world, because in fact, that's the only thing that ever has. It has to start. And you are a leader, but you're not alone. And I'm certainly looking forward to helping you as I move from the work I've been doing on electromagnetic fields. I intend to work more in the integrative oncology sphere as well. I want to honor the memory of my dear collaborator, Mitchell Gaynor, who I worked with very closely until his untimely death, and recognize that what's happening now is a revolution is underway in oncology, and it's being led from the bottom and the top. From the bottom, it's being led by patients. You happen to be a patient. But from the top, it's being led by doctors. You happen to be a doctor. You are both. So you are absolutely both. And unfortunately, there are more and more doctors with cancer who realized that you cannot simply rely on conventional treatment alone. Conventional treatment can be important, but this Congress I just came back from on mistletoe, I was impressed that almost all of the studies that they're talking about now involve using mistletoe with chemotherapy, with immunotherapy, not instead of it. Now, sometimes it can work instead of, because where there are no options like osteosarcoma that's relapsed, there's no known treatment for that really. But mistletoe, as you surely know, has been shown to be effective where normally these people with this relapsing cancer would be dead within months. There are a substantial number of cases who are now alive 5 years. And that's an amazing story. And we need to get those stories out more. And I think that what we're finding is that there are more and more people. You're not as alone as you think you are. That's what I will tell you. And young oncologists enter the field of oncology, as most people do, because they want to save lives. And then they end up burying way too many people. And now more and more of the younger oncologists are saying, wait a minute, we've got to be open-minded about the fact that mistletoe can be useful under some circumstances. There's a reason why this is the most widely prescribed drug in Europe for cancer.
Yeah.
There's a reason. And it does reduce side effects. That's fine. But it also has a healing property in addition to that. And we've got to get that information in the hands of people who can make the decision. And I'm going to work to help you do that. I'm going to work to make insurance cover mistletoe.
Yeah.
It's certainly, there are drugs like Procrit, which was approved despite people saying, wait a minute, you're going to increase red blood cells. What else are you going to increase? And it turns out that Procrit, which is expensive and widely approved to help cancer patients, sure, you can help a cancer patient like my mother was with advanced stomach cancer. She felt better when she got her Procrit shot. She had a little more red blood cells, but she also died faster because of it.
Exactly.
There's no question about it. And there's a lot of examples of that. And we've got to take advantage of the fact that younger oncologists recognize that they've got to reach beyond the traditional chemotherapy tools if they're going to really help people deal with cancer. And I think that's why you are going to succeed, because you are the right person and this is the right time.
Thank you for that. And thank you for those inspirational words, because just hearing you tell a little bit of story, because in reading all of your books, and we'll talk about what's getting ready to be reintroduced here again soon, and another one in the hopper, you share very compelling stories of changing policies and changing the way we think and do things with just who you are, your knowledge, and the people you magnify into your world, like that you bring into your world. It's just incredible to me. And so the funny thing though is you also spoke to something in this conversation, which is, you're a magnet for these unbelievable innovators, but you're also a magnet for controversy, criticism. Those are the other things that come with this. So I really want people to understand, like, if they went out and Googled you right now, they'll see all of your accolades, but they'll also see your critics, and namely around your position on cell phone radiation and EMFs and some of the environmental toxins that you've already alluded to. So you are one not afraid to stand up and just question public policy, to question research in certain fields such as oncology, which we'll talk about here in a moment. And you're a revered, reputable scientist. You're not a naturopath, you're not coming from that realm. You are legit in your endeavors. And so how do you navigate this environment?
Well, now I am no longer, on a full-time faculty position. And I would say I was very fortunate to have mentors who agreed with my view about the need to go beyond. And unfortunately, Ron Herberman, who brought me into the University of Pittsburgh Cancer Institute to set up the Center for Environmental Oncology, unfortunately, he died way too soon. And it became clear that the university was not as committed to environmental oncology as he was. But I was very lucky to have people like that. I worked for Phil Lee when I worked for the secretary of HHS. He was the only person I think who ever has served as the assistant secretary for health twice, first for Carter and then for Clinton. And so when I worked with him, he also was incredibly encouraging of going beyond the conventional. And we joked, but because of him, things like acupuncture, we had an NIH consensus conference
Yep.
on acupuncture.
Mhm.
And that was in the 1990s.
Yeah.
And people smirked. But in fact, as you understand very well, it was established that acupuncture was a very effective modality for many things that were resistant to conventional medical treatment. And certainly drugging people with back pain was on the way out, although it was the norm back then, 40 milligrams of Valium in a day, and people would be comatose and unable to move, and they'd go into bed rest and they'd use muscle atrophy. Whereas acupuncture gets people up and moving. And we know from all we understand about most of these chronic joint issues that motion is lotion. And getting people to be able to move was very valuable. So I worked for people who were open-minded, and you need to try to find them. But if when you don't find them, which can be the case, you got to keep your own counsel and move on.
That's
And don't bother fighting battles that are not worth fighting. I would say to my doctoral students, pick your battles. You can't fight them all. And now when the world is awash in so much horrible news, and there's so many bad things happening in the world, it's really important to focus on those you love that are close to you and keep them close to you and appreciate that, because it all can be changed in a moment. And I think that's one of the lessons of what's going on in the Middle East, is to be grateful for what we have and to pray. I think praying is always a good thing, even whatever form it takes, whether it's meditation, which is something that I do. And I also pray. I also am a person of modern Jewish faith, and I believe that there will be a time of peace will come, although this is not it. And it's a dreadful, dreadful time. So I think under these times, focus on what you can control.
yes.
And set yourself an agenda of things that are doable. Don't, make it doable. And of course, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. It's always dangerous to do that. On the other hand, you can cultivate your eggs a bit.
I like it.
You want to, that's what I would say is important to do right now, is let's focus. What do we know? In integrative oncology, we know that intravenous vitamin C is extremely helpful. And we know we have some ideas of why. We know that mistletoe in many different forms can be very effective.
Right.
And for many different types of cancer. But the details matter, as you have written beautifully in your book on mistletoe, which is a superb, superb book. It really makes a big difference as to what type of cancer you're dealing with, what form of mistletoe you want to use. And the two of them are related, and each patient may differ. So that's why, as we were saying before, medicine is science-based, but it's an art, ultimately.
Yeah.
It really is.
I love this. And I so appreciate you reiterated the importance of, okay, we see the battles, we see our naysayers, we see, like, it's easy to gravitate towards the negative or towards the yeah buts and the shoulda couldas and all of those pieces. I really appreciate you reiterating the importance of like building a new path, building a new path forward. And so I know there's a few different ways of sayings that have been out there around sort of like, don't put all your energy into the old, build something new. And that's what we at Metabolic Training Institute of Health are doing. I spent the first 20 some years of my career trying to make best friends with the environment, around me, the medical establishment around me. And it was life sucking. I mean, to be really honest, I know you've been in it for decades beyond that in a variety of ways, and a much higher level, like into the federal government level and even international policy level. I don't even know how you did it because it's pretty intense. But that is where I just realized a few years ago that there is no fixing this system. It is so deeply indoctrinated. It's so holding on to a sinking Titanic with no interest of letting it go, that I think this is our opportunity to create something entirely new and to reformulate, maybe build upon, improve upon from a whole different approach what we can do. And you're speaking to that so beautifully about your history and even where you want to go in this next few chapters of your life. And so with that, before we leave the environmental EMF world, which is another, I mean, that's how I really knew you initially, is from the cell phone world, the EMF world, the environmental world, well before I knew of your interest in the integrative oncology and mistletoe world.
Right, right.
But when I ask this question of you, because I know the answer, but I want it to come from the person who's been looking at it through a very conventional filter of research and scientific endeavor for many, many decades. Do you see environmental toxins and EMFs playing a role in our metabolic health or lack thereof?
Well, absolutely. And let me just say that one of the things we know, for example, is that children who have just slightly elevated lead levels, who use cell phones, have more learning problems. That's we know that from studies that were done in Korea. In the Asian countries, as you may know, have been some of the earlier adapters and adopters of the technology. And they have internet addiction camps. They have for children. They have diagnosed in children digital dementia with functional MRIs that show a lack of development in the brain of middle school children that spend more time with their devices. So we have focused here on the physical effects of electromagnetic fields as well as the psychological effects. We're getting more involved in them. There's a concept now of technoference. It refers to,
Technoference.
yeah,
Interesting. Yeah.
it's developed in the psychiatric literature to refer to when technology interferes with basic human exchanges, whether it's at the dinner table or the bedroom or the bathroom. You would not believe the extent to which we have evidence that the technology is actually interfering. For example, there are children who learn to use the potty because of an iPad app. They have an iPotty. I'm not making this up. And the iPotty, there are children, toddlers, who will not go to the bathroom without their iPad. That's a terrible thing on so many different levels. Okay.
On so many different
We
levels.
know that the skull of a child is thinner, that the brains contain more fluid, and we know that the electromagnetic fields will get more deeply into their brains and bodies than it will in ours. We also know that it can interfere with myelin. Myelin is the fatty protective sheath that forms around neurons. And increasingly, we're having epidemiologic data to show the damage. Now, I'm also a toxicologist. So if
Yes.
you look at the experimental evidence on electromagnetic fields, what do we know? The National Toxicology Program did a state-of-the-art study in mice and rats and found what the reviewers called clear evidence of cancer. Now, the good news is it's rare cancer of the brain, glioblastoma, as well as a rare cancer around the nerve in the heart. And these rare cancers, however, can be very dangerous, and they are increased in animals. And my view is, look, we have to pay attention to what the animals are trying to tell us.
There are
And that's
canaries in the coal mine, literally.
I've spent my life trying to make that clear.
Mm.
Every agent we know causes cancer in people will produce it in animals when adequately tested. So for
Mm.
that reason, we need to pay attention to the animal tests. When it comes to cell phone radiation, we are not doing that. We are now in the midst of an experiment on ourselves and our children. And that experiment is being created by the fact that the technology is so pervasive.
Right.
Children are growing up today in a sea of radio frequency radiation that did not exist even 5 years ago. And so we have advice on our website.
I was just going to say, I know you're telling us the bad news, but give us something solution centric. Here she
This is
goes.
what you can do to reduce your wireless radiation.
Right.
And there's simple advice here as to turn your antennas off, to put it on airplane mode. If you have it on airplane mode and wireless on, then you can still get calls, as a matter of fact. But you want to be sure to have all of your antennas off when you want to avoid exposures. If you have to give a child an iPad, which I understand on a long trip, that may be the case. Download what you want them to look at, download it, then give them the device on airplane mode so that they're not being exposed to this wireless radiation. And whenever possible, use wired devices. Okay. This is my wired mouse. Okay. I am talking to you from a wired internet connection. It's faster, it's safer, it's more secure. Especially with respect to sleep, as you know very well, melatonin is a natural hormone we make when we sleep in the dark, and it's useful because it repairs damage that occurs just from being alive. Oxygen, sunlight, they all create free radicals. If you sleep in the dark with no electronics nearby, your body will make melatonin. Cancer patients today regularly take melatonin because it helps to repair that damage. However, these devices interfere with melatonin production. And that is why it's so important that you not have exposures during sleep. And even when you're using your screen toward the end of the evening, use a blue light blocking glass as well. Avoid making calls in cars generally, which is a problem for some people.
Yeah.
And of course, texting instead of talking is a good idea. But where the signal is low, be very careful, because the phone is smart and it will pump into that phone more and more energy because the signal is low. So only use it in a true emergency when the signal is low. And remember 4 words: distance is your friend.
Yes.
So keeping things a little bit away from your body, it makes a big difference in terms of what exposures you're going to get. So we've been working with a number of groups around the world, including the Vienna Medical Association, Cyprus Medical Association, and in the United States, the American Academy of Pediatrics, to say reduce exposures, particularly for young children. And we have materials in Spanish as well, and I will give them to you, right, about protecting the ones you love and explaining what on the back we have information from the American Academy of Pediatrics recommending what to do in the home and school to reduce exposure. So
amazing.
I believe that we've established the science base pretty clearly. And now what we need to do is working with people like you, get the message out. And that's why I'm really happy to announce that we have a new edition of Disconnect.
Yes.
A new edition. And it's coming out January 1st.
Amazing.
And if anybody buys, I think it's 4 or more, we will give you a discount for a book club. So I want to encourage book clubs to form around this.
Start to create discussions and solutions based. I love this idea.
Right. And we want people to engage and understand that there's a lot of science here. And we think it's a perfect present to give somebody who isn't convinced yet that there's a problem.
I love it. And Dr. Devra, this is what I think is really interesting is you gave, like I said, when did the first edition come out of Disconnect?
2010.
Gosh, and I heard I must have read it sometime within the year before you. So try 2011 or 2001. No, excuse me. 2011 would have been the window I would have read it. And then meeting you, speaking about it in 2012. What would you say? And I can remember, so much of what you're talking about right now, you were talking about then.
Yes.
So in the new edition, you were talking about before the recording went on that you've expanded the edition. There's even more research, more compelling data, more compelling solutions. Yeah. So and of course, then I don't think you had your environmental trust up and running yet. So that will have some new links, I'm assuming, in the book as well.
Yep.
maybe tell us one or two of the biggest like ahas or the biggest things that has caught your attention since the first edition came out. Give us a little
Well, it's hard to
teaser.
believe. It's hard to believe, but when the first edition came out, we did not have the incredible uh, amount of studies that have been produced since on
Wow.
cancer. And
Oh,
so in the first edition, we talked about the cancer risk as a possibility and discussed experimental evidence indicating that was possible.
wow.
That was 2010. In 2011, the World Health Organization,
Yeah.
International Agency for Research on Cancer,
Yeah.
reviewed all the evidence available at that time. And in May of 2011, they issued a report saying that there was concern that cell phone radiation was a possible carcinogen, just like formaldehyde and some pesticides in the same category. They issued that report in 2011. Then in 2016 and 17, the National Toxicology Program issued its report saying that they found clear evidence of cancer in animals and DNA damage in rats and mice,
Mm.
which, as you know, often DNA damage can be a signal of cancer or neurodegenerative diseases or other things. So the science has become even more compelling than when I first wrote the book. In
Wow.
addition, though, a number of countries have taken steps to reduce exposures. France actually tests radiation from phones. Think about that. We don't. What happens in the United States, they take one phone, they take it to a lab that they prefer, they have it tested
Mm.
once to see how, if it doesn't get to a temperature that would heat up the brain or the body, that's it. And
Wow.
for a 6-minute phone call or perhaps a 30-minute phone call, but that's it. Now, that is not, in fact, relevant to the way most people use phones today.
Exactly.
It's definitely not. And they don't test for what we now also know since the book was published, which is there's clear evidence of sperm damage. The quantity and quality of sperm
Yeah.
produced is affected by cell phone radiation. And we know that because of research done in the test tube, where you take human sperm and you expose one test tube to cell phone radiation for 2 hours and the other you don't expose. Now, of course, sperm don't live in a test tube and they're all going to die, but the rate of death 3 times faster in the cell phone exposed sperm, and the rate of mitochondrial DNA damage to the engine of the cells is
Wow.
3 times greater as well. So all of that accumulated after the book was written. And so in the new edition, we have new science and we have new practical advice for how do you protect yourself? How do you protect your family? How do you protect children in schools? And so and it has very clear practical advice about what to do.
I'm so happy to hear that because it's like, it can be overwhelming, it can be daunting to just hear the bad news, bad news, bad news, bad news. And it's inevitable. Like, we're not going to get rid of EMFs. Like, they're here to stay and they're going to expand. So I really appreciate that you've taken a very proactive, what can you do about it to mitigate your risk? And one other thing before we move on to kind of the last couple of topics I'd love to cover with you today is one thing I learned at the EMF conference that was very surprising to me, that I think was new evidence and likely being talked about in your book as well, was the pinging off of, if you alluded to already lead levels in the body, but you also alluded to people had viruses or mold on board, and the interaction with those electrical fields in sort of stimulating or reactivating or progressing those other compounding events. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Well, we are electrical beings. Our
Exactly.
brain, our heart work with electrical impulses, very low levels, but without that, the definition of death is the absence of electrical activity in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
What we're doing now with the artificial increase of electromagnetic field exposure is without precedence in human history. We have never had such a surge in exposure.
Right.
And of course, metals are going to be affected by electromagnetic field, but also any foreign body, whether mold, viral particles as well, will be influenced. And what we know in experiments that have done, again, in cell culture, is that electromagnetic fields stimulate cell growth generally. And they can sometimes kill cell growth under some circumstances, which is why one of the areas of medicine that's developing is electroceuticals. That is the use of electricity in medicine. For example, there is a technology developed in Israel to treat brain cancer with tumor treating fields.
Right.
Now, I believe that brain cancer can be caused by electromagnetic fields, and another form of electromagnetic fields can treat it.
Interesting. Yeah, different frequencies, right?
Exactly. And different, a whole bunch of things. We know that an electromagnetic field is characterized by frequency, how fast it moves, by its power, by the waveform, by polarity, and all of these influence the biological impact of electromagnetic fields.
Right.
And all we're saying is let's pay attention to this. Let's understand, why did France in 2019 say that the abdomens of teenagers and pregnant women should not be exposed to electromagnetic fields?
Wow.
Why did France and Belgium and Turkey ban advertising for children with phones? They banned it. All right.
Amazing.
So many countries have taken steps. Many countries have much lower levels of exposure than the United States and Canada, right?
Interesting.
And
Fascinating.
the United States and Canada, unfortunately, as a report from Harvard came out after my book was published, it said that the Federal Communications Commission, which sets all the standards, is a captured agency. And we actually, at Environmental Health Trust, we won our lawsuit because we sued the FCC saying, how can you tell us that the standards for phones, which are 25 years old, are still safe?
Wow.
And the court at the time said, you got to go back and look at the new science. Of course, they didn't give the agency a deadline. So we're getting ready to hold their feet to the fire. But that is the reality of what we're dealing with. The French are monitoring, at least checking phones and changing the way phones are tested, by the way.
Wow.
We test phones up to an inch off the body.
Wow.
And that's not the way phones are used.
Right.
We
They're
published
on the body. Right.
We published a paper on the increase of colorectal cancer in people under the age of 40.
Yep.
And in that paper, we referred to the fact that there was evidence that electromagnetic fields can accelerate the growth of colorectal cancer cells in vitro. And what else is explaining a 4-fold increase in colorectal cancer around the world today in people under the age of 40?
Amazing. Well, there's people like Dr. Zach Bush, who we've also interviewed, who talks about there's that interface between even the glyphosate and the EMFs, how we talked about those other foreign agents that are kind of reflective or magnetic to these fields. And that would be one of them as well, which definitely has shown to increase, lipopolysaccharides and gut inflammation and other pieces. So it's a collection of things, but like you noted earlier, these are things that have never been part of our human evolution, that are really new things in a very short period of time. And we don't know. I mean, we suspect, and those who are getting labeled as tinfoil hat wearing crazies, we suspect, but it'll be a generation or two down the road when those suspicions are likely shown to be right. Just like your work in the impact of cigarette exposure, secondhand cigarette exposure, right? Handout. Like, you guys are hearing this from someone who's been told she was batshit crazy on her belief systems and what she was presenting out there. And yet it came back around, just like the fact that her organization was able to win this recent case about, like, let's go back and look at data that's not 25 years old, because we have a different animal today of these electromagnetic fields. So you are such a pioneer on this. And I think that segues nicely, because you've spoken to a few times in this last discussion about what EMFs are doing. You've mentioned the word cell proliferation a few times, right? So of course, in my world, my little spidey feelies come up of like, that's not a good idea for anybody dealing with a cancering process. So you wrote a book in 2007, which I didn't read until probably 2015. Like, it was I read Disconnect is How I Found You, and then I stumbled upon, the secret history of the war on cancer after the fact, which also 2007, still insanely, if not more so relevant today than ever before. So you dive in that book, you dive into the politics and the economics of cancer research and treatment and how these have shaped our perceived war on cancer. And honestly, the piece I love the most about your book is how it talks about we've done that to the expense of actually effective preventative treatments. And so I would also like to take a moment, because this is the perfect bridge to where you're going in your life, but what has changed since the writing of that book that's better or worse for you?
Hmm. Well, let's talk about what's better. In that book, I had a chart which calculated the radiation dose from a CAT scan to an infant from an adult CAT scan machine. And at that time, as you may remember, CAT scans would be given to babies. If a baby was brought in with injuries, they might get from the ER in a short period of time, they might get multiple CAT scans that were not adjusted to the small body size of the baby. Within a short period of time, we at the University of Pittsburgh then convened a work group of radiologists from around the country that discussed this, and the American College of Pediatric Radiology revised their guidelines so that now, when a child is in the ER, at least they are supposed to not get a CAT scan unless it's absolutely necessary, and their machine is to be adjusted to the lower body weight. At that time, a single CAT scan could give a baby up to 4,000 chest x-rays in one scan.
I would really love to see studies of those children exposed today, because
Well,
these
let
are
me
the things
tell
that
you,
take decades. Oh, you know them. Oh,
there,
girl.
one of the things that nobody can explain, and it's been going on for a while, and I believe this is a factor, is
Ah,
why is childhood cancer continuing to
right.
increase?
Yeah.
And clearly, I believe that these CT scans, again, and on a population basis, are playing a role. There are multiple factors. Glyphosate is certainly relevant across the board for many different things, and this could be pediatric cancer, could yet be another one. But we are seeing unexplained increases in pediatric cancer, again, around the world. And I believe that the overuse of CT scans, this is a success story. In that book, I also talked about aspartame, which
Way
legalized
ahead of the curve. You were
because,
way ahead of the curve on that one.
because Donald Rumsfeld became the head of the company that got it approved. He knew nothing about aspartame, but he certainly knew politics in Washington, and it was the politics that got that approved. And I discussed that in the book. And in that book, by the way, which, as you know, is a pretty big book.
Yeah, it's a juicy one. I was trying to find it to pull it out here, but it's a biggie.
It's a big book. My sister said, "Don't write books like that again. You can't take it."
I'll read them, I promise.
Anyhow, in that book, I also raised the question, how much do we know about the safety of cell phones? After all, we've been assured that they're safe, but let's look at the data. And that's when I started to look at it. By the way, around shortly after the time of my first grandchild was born, and he was a very clever child because he could, in his diapers, crawl over, find a cell phone that was turned off, turn it on, and play a game.
Amazing.
He was 9
Amazing.
months old. He's now a concert pianist.
Wow.
He's a very bright boy. But I began to really plunge into this question because I had worked on lead and I knew the importance of protecting the fast growing brain of the infant.
Yes, yes.
There's nothing, and we do go to great lengths to protect them with bike helmets and seat belts and everything. And here is this exposure taking place. And of course, at first I thought, wow, a smart boy. And then I thought, oh my gosh, what are we doing? And the more I looked, and then I found research that had been published in England. I found research from people in Switzerland. And I thought, no, this doesn't seem like a good idea. But I raised questions in that book because I didn't have answers. And interestingly, that was one of the only things in the book that questioned themselves. They said, well, why is she talking about that? That can't be a problem, because if it was, I'd know about it. But then
That a lot of times.
in the new edition of Disconnect, I make it very clear you can't, the companies that produce these devices cannot buy insurance for any damages to health or the environment from electromagnetic fields.
Wow.
Swiss Re, Lloyd's of London will not cover those damages.
Wow.
That tells you something.
Yes, it does.
In 2019, before the pandemic, Swiss Re reviewed the data on 5G, and they said it was, quote, off the leash, quote, and uninsurable. It would be like asbestos, they warned. So there's no insurance for these industries. And then what they're trying to do is they're trying to put the liability from them onto the landlords where the antennas will be put. And our organization, Environmental Health Trust, has been very useful to citizens that are trying to say, wait a minute, many countries will not allow this close proximity. Why are you putting a 5G tower right at our schools, right at my bedroom window?
Wow. My gosh, unbelievable. So yet again, you have had a rippling effect. You've been asking the questions. You've been seeing the writing on the wall for some time. And when you've given us, like, again, sort of the bad news, and you've given us some solutions, and you're hinting to, I can't wait to get the next edition of Disconnect that's launching here at the beginning of 2024. I can't wait to see the expansion and what's there, because I've heard some of it, because I've been following you and following your foundation for some time. So I know I keep somewhat current, but it's really nice when it's all in one place. So thank you for that. But I think where I want to kind of take us for the rounding out is in context of just self-awareness and self-care. What are some practical steps that you do every day to mitigate the effects of environmental pollutants on your health in general? And what we were sort of talking about at the beginning of before we started recording, of just, I want you, if you're comfortable sharing your age and who you are and what you do, because you give me hope and goals of how I want to thoughtfully have a healthy longevity process. And you are an example of that. So let our listeners know what you do to care for yourself in the midst of all this information that you carry.
Well, I get up in the morning, usually meditating before I fully wake. And I do some basic yoga stretches. If I have the time, I'll do 15, 20 minutes of a routine of, sun salutation, downward dog, and some basic trunk rotations, which are pretty important. As you get older, the so-called morning stiffness is inevitable, and motion is lotion. It really is. So moving is extremely important. It's more important as you get older. I do weight training, try to do it 3 times a week.
Amazing.
And I'm very active physically in terms of sports and biking, hiking, and still downhill skiing a little, always carefully, by the way, as well as cross country. And I'm very fortunate that I have a husband of 48 years who does these things with me. Nice. So we're both very lucky. I certainly, as I need not tell you about the importance of nutrition and metabolic terrain. I try to eat a modified, I wouldn't say ketonic diet, but a diet that is, where I'm eating carbohydrates, they're only very good ones.
Good.
I certainly avoid white things, whether it's et cetera. And in addition to watching my nutrition, because of all my history, which I've written about growing up in one of those polluted zones in the world at the time.
Right.
I do take nutraceuticals, and that would include the usual that you've written about in your excellent book that I really refer people to, because it's got a lot of good information about what types of nutrition work with what types of issues. So I use, of course, different forms of omega-3 fatty acids. I prefer krill and plant-based as opposed to fish, because you never know what's been in the fish, even if they say it's been tested for mercury and PCBs. I'm not convinced. not always, no. And I think fiber, as you get older, is very important. And the form of fiber, ideally, you want to get it from food. but there are certain formulations that I think can be very helpful, and I do use that. And I also believe that it's important to get good quality of nutraceuticals that you use. Um, I take vitamin D 5,000 units a day, and I found very effective something that Mitch Gaynor told me. When I feel a cold coming on, sometimes I will take 50,000 units of D, and with vitamin C to bowel tolerance. And that often knocks out whatever might be coming on. I also use an infrared sauna, particularly if I was feeling a little bit under the weather.
Yes.
But I try to use it, twice a week, and more regularly when I'm dealing with other things. But generally, I think an infrared sauna is a great thing. And as you know very well from the work on mistletoe, elevating temperature in the body can be beneficial for so many different things. It's really quite
It's our
interesting.
friend. Beaver's our friend.
It,
Yeah.
it is. It is indeed. And I find I actually, even though I'm sweating and feeling, I, it also
Mhm.
has a very a beneficial feeling to it. I also pray, and particularly nowadays with the dreadful situation going on, I find that prayer helps me. It's not that I'm asking God to intervene in my life, whoever she might be, but that I pray for guidance and recognizing that I come from a people that has gone through a lot of difficult times, and this is a very difficult time for Jewish people, because there are no good choices right now. There are no good choices, and so finding strength in community, just as I would say to you, connecting to people who agree with you, who support what you're trying to do intellectually, is very important, because it's tough. I mean, I'm not sugarcoating this. It's tough. You are a pioneer, and what you have to do first, you have to keep yourself strong. You have to stay strong and do all that you can to stay strong. And then you have to know who you can trust to work with you and help you. And there are more people out there that can help you than you know now. I promise you that. When I attended the Mistletoe Congress in non-violent Germany that I just came back from, people said, "Oh, you know Naisha Winters.
Oh,
She's wonderful." And you are, and you are. And what you're trying to do to bring a more of a scientific foundation to what we're doing is critically important for integrative oncology. It really is. And there are more people who will work with you. We just have to figure out how to get that group more together. There are a lot of them out there. Of course, the great Peter Hindenburger
oh
is on.
gosh, such a mentor, such a dear human being, such a leader in
Yes.
the space. And I think one thing I hear you saying, one of the things I think you missed in your description of how you are such a ripe, young, I'll let you fill in the dots, dot, dot, dot of the actual age you are, because it's astonishing. And like I said, I'm really there. But one of the things I think is obvious for our listeners, at least it is for me, is having a passion and a purpose is also very longevity creating.
Yeah. And my husband jokes, I can never retire because I'm not getting paid for what I'm doing, so it doesn't matter. But I am 77 and a half, right? And and usually when I say that, people go, "What?"
I know. People, and especially meeting you in person, like being on a screen, but in
Right.
person, you are just this like ripped, healthy, vital, running circles around most people half your age, just from the limited physical experiences I've had with you. It's a sight to behold. And I think that you are, I get tired when I hear people say, oh, I feel this way just because I'm older or I'm aging and they're in their 40s or their 50s. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that does not have to be the case. And so
No.
you are a living, a testament to that. So,
Well, I have to thank my father, who had an extraordinary amount of energy, and my mother, who suffered greatly because she had so many different illnesses, but nonetheless had a certain energy. And frankly, I come from a family of people who don't quit.
and
You know
I
what?
think that says a lot too, because you've been up against, I mean, I'm only just getting started with what I'm up against. I mean, in some ways, I'm not. I mean, I've been for 32 years with my own diagnoses and other processes. I've been up against a
You've
lot.
actually, I think, don't sell yourself short. You have overcome tremendous, tremendous challenges in life. And you're young, but you have done an extraordinary amount, particularly given what you faced as a 19-year-old with advanced ovarian cancer. You're extraordinary. And you are a model and inspiration for anyone dealing with cancer. You really are. And I think that what you're doing now and how you've devoted your life to trying to improve cancer care is extraordinary. It really is.
Thank you. Well,
So
I
don't,
think
yeah.
thank you.
And I think,
I'll take it in. I'll let it in. Hard for me to do sometimes.
and understand that I think that I want to help you reach more people who can support what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
I really do. Because I think it's so important. And I think it will be a challenge because you have so many interesting ideas. It will be a challenge to pick the top 3 that you need to focus on. I'd like to help you figure out your 5-year plan.
Thank you. And we will be in touch after this year. I think where I want to leave this is that you have shown me in many ways over our time of knowing each other, and you've shown our listeners today that you already are a living legend and that you have already left a legacy on our planet. And I know just from some teasers of what's coming that our listeners will have to come back and listen to you and I again, hopefully sometime in early 2024, of what's coming next. You are about to make another big ripple in the fabric of our lives. And I'm just incredibly grateful for your passion, your commitment, your wisdom, your curiosity, and your friendship. And so thank you so much for being here, Dr. Davis.
It is an honor always. And thank you so much for what you are doing. I wish you all the best.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Metabolic Matters. We hope you found today's conversation insightful and empowering. As we wrap up today's episode, we want to take a moment to acknowledge the incredible team and supporters who make this podcast possible. First, we'd like to thank our production team, Alex Sanchez, Cindy Kennedy, Jessica Gilman, and Lynn Hughes, for their hard work behind the scenes. Our theme song was written by Julie Newmark and performed by Whiskey Flower. And finally, we want to thank you, our listeners, for tuning in and being a part of the Metabolic Matters community. Do you want to learn more? Please visit our website, metabolicmatters.org, and you can follow us on Instagram. If you liked this episode, please leave us a review and share it with your friends and family. And if you want to help support our mission, spreading awareness and knowledge about metabolic health, reach out. We'd love you to join with us. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on upcoming episodes. We have so much exciting content coming your way. Until next time, stay curious, stay empowered, and remember, your metabolic health matters.